morning. Good morning. Good morning. I'd like to call the subcommittee, Transportation, Infrastructure, and Planning Subcommittee to order. It is 10:05. I will ask the city attorney to explain public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the public may speak for up to 2 minutes to comment on agenda items to be discussed. Comments must be related to the agenda item and the action being considered by the subcommittee. The City Council and staff cannot discuss or comment on matters related to pending investigations, claims, or litigation. Additionally, any member of the public who appears before the subcommittee in their capacity as a lobbyist must, as required by Phoenix City Code, disclose this fact before addressing the subcommittee. The City Code requires speakers to present their comments in a respectful and courteous manner. Profane language, threats, or personal attacks on members of the public, council members, or staff are not allowed. A person who violates these rules will lose their opportunity to continue to speak.
Thank you so much for that. I will note that our interpreter is not yet here, but is on way. But the good news is we don't have anyone that is in need of Spanish interpretation. So we will move on to our first item on our agenda, which is the approval of the TIP meeting minutes from the May 15, 2024 meeting.
I move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 The chair votes aye as well. Motion carries, a vote of 3.
Move to approve?
Oh, I'm sorry. Vice Mayor, couldn't hear you very well.
Sorry, I didn't hear. Now I can hear. Sorry about that. I
Great.
second if it was moved to be approved. Thank you.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously. We have a few things on the agenda, the consent agenda. I know we have a speaker on item number 3, so unless there's some questions for item number 2 and 4, I would entertain a motion on those.
Move to approve items 2 and 4.
Second.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you so much. Motion carries, all in favor on that unanimously. We have a speaker on item number 3. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Eric Nielsen?
Hello. I actually wanted to speak on item 4, and I was for it, so it's cool that you guys approved it. What I came to say about item 4 and historic preservation is that I think it's really important that we don't knock down historic buildings. But I put a lot of thought into what I witnessed about the old people trying to sell that old laundromat building in District 7, and the back and forth between them and the city council. And I paid a lot of attention to when they're building these buildings downtown. And one thing I noticed is they're able to build it right up to the edge. So I think, the old laundromat building is not Mystery Castle or, say, the Phoenix Madison Square Garden. So I would say if the roof's crap and the building's really not really gonna, like Councilman Moore was saying, no one's gonna want a field trip to the laundromat building. Why couldn't we just take down just a partial section of the building, like get rid of the roof and maybe 2 of the walls, and then use the remaining right-angled wall as a facade to the new building, put a plaque there. That way, not only can we respect the building that came before, we can continue the progress around downtown Phoenix. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nielsen. Thank you for your comments. Do we have a motion on item number 3?
Move to approve item number 3.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries 4-0. Let's turn to item number 5, which is on the agenda for information and discussion. Director Felipe Moreno.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of this subcommittee. We are here today to talk about our Public Works Solid Waste Financial Update. With me today is Brandy Barrett, Deputy Public Works Director, who's going to co-present with me on the updates. So with that, we'll get started. A little bit of background on the solid waste utility. We are an essential public service, as you know, providing environmentally safe and responsible solid waste collection for over 420,000 residents across the city. That means we're collecting that recycling, that garbage, the bulk trash, and then we're also having the post-closure responsibilities of ensuring that we handle that at our transfer stations and landfill in an environmentally responsible way. So we process over 1 million tons of material each year while maintaining those regulatory compliance. So who are we and what are we made up of? Our resource requirements are really comprised of four things that make up the utility. So we are people. Those are your drivers out there, your people at the transfer stations and the landfills, our environmental compliance and code enforcement people, call center, et cetera. We are infrastructure, we are landfill, we are transfer stations, we have a compost facility, all the things that maintain and manage that material. We are trucks. That's a big part of how we do things. Much like water has pipes, we have trucks to carry our material through the city. And we are health and regulatory and safety requirements. So we have to make sure that we are doing things in concert with ADEQ, Maricopa County, and EPA, and everything that we do. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brandy, who's going to walk us through the financial update.
Thank you very much, Felipe. Vice Mayor Stark, members of the committee. Before we dive into the financial plan, I would like to walk you through the major components of revenues and expenses for the solid waste utility. We'll go ahead and start with revenues. We have three major components of revenues and then some additional revenues that I'll discuss. First and foremost, our largest source of revenue is our monthly fees that we charge for our residential household service. Then our commercial gate rate, those are the fees that we charge at our transfer station and landfills for disposal. We do also receive revenue from the sale of recycled materials. And then our last category, other revenues, is a conglomeration of some smaller earnings, including state refuse fees, interest earnings, and collection of delinquent fees, and so on. So for the current fiscal year, on the left column, you can see that revenues are estimated to come in, prior fiscal year, last year, they did actually come in at $204 million. Let's go ahead and look at the current fiscal year estimate on the right-hand column by category. Monthly fees are estimated to come in about 1% higher than last year at $180.1 million. Our commercial gate rate is also forecast to come in higher at 11% more than last year's actuals. When we get to recycling revenue, we see that those are projecting to come in at about 22% lower than last year. And we can talk about that for a little minute. Recycling revenues, as you know, are impacted by both the economy as well as consumer behavior, and they typically fluctuate over time. So for example, during the COVID years, we had what we would call the Amazon effect. So folks were mostly home, purchasing a lot of items through mail order. So we were seeing a lot of cardboard and other packaging materials in our recycling stream. In fact, our revenue increased almost 200% over that time. However, starting with last year, folks were back in the office, back at schools, not ordering as many things online. And so we've started to see less materials come through in our recycling stream, and at the same time, the commodity values of those, or the values for those commodities has decreased. Because consumers are buying less, they're generating less waste. So we're seeing pressure in both of those categories. Thank you. Our other revenues are forecast to come in at $900,000 or 16% higher than last fiscal year. That brings us to operations and maintenance. O&M is a subset of our total operating expenditures for the utility, and our costs this year are estimated to come in at $173.8 million. And that's an increase of 9% over prior year actuals. And the main drivers of those cost increases are salaries and benefits as well as equipment maintenance. So the big three for O&M for solid waste, when you put them together, comprise about 94% of our O&M expenditures, and that's personal services at 42%, equipment management, customer care, billing, and fuel at 27%, and contractual services at 25%. You can also see the blue slice of the pie. That's our commodities and capital outlay expenditures, and those make up about 5% of overall O&M. The 24 to 29 six-year proposed capital improvement plan is estimated at $202.1 million, and our CIP includes only mission-critical core operations and regulatory compliance items that primarily includes critical infrastructure and equipment improvement and replacement, as well as environmental, regulatory, landfill gas, and groundwater monitoring. Now that we've discussed how the solid waste utility earns money and spends money,
Could you give us an example of a regulatory change that might affect us cost-wise?
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. For instance, we pay a permitting fee at 25 cents per ton to ADEQ for all our commercial customers for everything we handle and the transactions we make. That is actually planned to go up in the next year to 58 cents per ton. So that's going to be a 132% increase. So that's one example of something regulatory that we have no control over that we must comply with and make sure we're paying.
Thank you. I always think it's helpful to have an example. Thank you.
thank you. So now that we've discussed how the solid waste utility earns money and spends money, I would like to review the financial plan with you. We're going to start with our resources, and our resources includes the ending year fund balance from the prior year. So anything we had left in our checkbook from last year, and then we add that to the estimated revenues we expect to receive this year, and that sums up to our resources. Then we're going to subtract out our total expenses, which includes the O&M we just discussed, also debt services, central services, and the cash-funded CIP. And that's going to provide us with our projected fund balance, and that's the first dark gray row. The solid waste utility, in collaboration with finance, has implemented an operating reserve of $25 million, and that's represented in the bottom two lines. The operating reserve is designed to protect the city's bond rating as well as to ensure financial resiliency. And it's one way we measure the health of our fund, by the ability to maintain that minimum operating reserve, and then how much over or under that reserve is when we compare it to our fund balances when we compare it to that reserve. So let's look at some numbers here. Okay. For the current fiscal year, our resources are estimated at $264.2 million. Our expenses are estimated at $204 million. Solid waste has seen some pressure on our operating expenditures as well as our CIP over the past few years due to inflation. And our utility has been able to weather these pressures through several actions. And those actions have ensured a balanced fund for the past several years, as well as this one. We are projecting a positive fund balance this fiscal year at $60.2 million, which, as you can see in the chart, is $35.2 million above our minimum operating reserve. Moving on to next fiscal year, we're starting to see a structural imbalance in the solid waste fund. Resources are projected at $268.7 million, and expenses are projected at $249 million. We see increases in overall operating expenditures by 7.6% next year, and the main drivers of those cost increases, again, are salaries and benefits and equipment maintenance. Starting next year, expenses are estimated to outpace revenue collections by about $40 million, resulting in a structural imbalance. However, we are still showing a positive fund balance in the amount of $19.7 million. But as you can see on the bottom two rows, we are starting to deplete our operating reserve, our financial resiliency reserve, by $5.3 million. That brings us to our forecast year, fiscal year 25-26. The structural imbalance from the prior fiscal year compounds in the forecast year. Resources are forecast at $233.4 million and expenses at $295 million. This growth is due to planned CIP expenditures. The structural imbalance accelerates, and the utility is forecast to spend $81 million more than revenues in that forecast year. So unfortunately, we are forecasting a deficit of $61.6 million. That means a negative fund balance. This, of course, will exhaust all of our financial resiliency reserves and puts the utility even further beyond our $25 million operating reserve by $86.6 million. Moving forward to our capital improvement plan, the capital needs for solid waste are not only supported by PAYGO, which is our cash-funded projects, but also by some other funds that include bonds, capital reserves, grants, and remediation funds. The chart shows the current CIP for this fiscal year, which is estimated at $18 million across all of the funding sources. The 6-year proposed CIP is in the next column, and that is estimated, as I mentioned earlier, at $202.1 million. I would like to point out that the 6-year CIP does include $134.9 million of currently unfunded needs in the out years. I'd like to provide you with a few examples of those projects that are unfunded at this point in time. Landfill infrastructure at our SR 85 landfill at $30.4 million, and this project ensures that we have landfill space for the future. Closed landfill infrastructure at $12.2 million, and those projects allow us to meet our environmental regulatory compliance obligations. Transfer station infrastructure at $58.7 million, and those projects allow us to address the aging infrastructure at our transfer stations and material recovery facilities. And citywide technology systems infrastructure at $5 million. Customer care and billing, CC&B, is our system of record for billing for our 420,000 customers. So as you can see, these are mission critical investments, and we are continuing to work on our financial strategy to address these projects in the out years. Now that you've seen the pressures, let's take a look at our history of solid waste revenue adjustments. In this chart, the orange bars are showing the city's revenue adjustments over the past 30 or so years. The gray line shows the solid waste industry consumer price index that's published by the United States Bureau of Labor and Statistics over the same time period. So really what we're showing here is a visual of where our revenue adjustments sit in relation to the solid waste CPI. Where you see spikes in the revenue adjustments, so the tall orange bars, those spikes were preceded by sustained years of no revenue adjustments. Now, I'd like to call your attention to the right side of the chart. The last revenue adjustment in fiscal year 1920 included a 2% inflation factor through January 2026, which is represented by the short orange bars on the far right. As you can see by the gray line, that inflation factor has been outpaced by the solid waste CPI every year since it was implemented. The most recent data shows the solid waste CPI at just over 6%. And with that, I would like to hand the presentation back to Felipe.
Thank you, Brandy. So as you can see, we do have some structural imbalances coming up. We're already starting to feel those effects, and they just compound in the coming years. And so that's due to a lot of the economic pressures that we are seeing, not unlike most utilities and organizations across the country. I call your attention back to the four things that really comprise of who we are, which is our people. With our people, we're seeing a 32% increase in our labor, and that's really due to the class and comp adjustment and study that Mayor and Council approved. That's paid dividends in ways of ensuring that we have a workforce that's out there ready to work. We all saw and suffered through the labor shortages last couple of years, and this has really helped shore that up. But with that, we had the class and comp study. We also did some things back then with Mayor and Council's support, which was to increase to $3 an hour CDL pay, doing hiring and retention incentives. All of those things comprise to make up that 32% increase. Infrastructure, construction costs across the board, we're seeing upwards of 20% increases there. That's to construct landfill, to do things at our transfer station, et cetera. And then trucks, this is really a big one. So 49% increase across the board for our trucks. And back in 2020, we were seeing $350,000 for a truck. Now we're getting quotes of upwards of $530,000 a truck. And so that's a 49% increase that really hurts us there. The other piece that goes along with this is maintenance. We are seeing year over year increased costs of maintenance. As our trucks age, we have to maintain them. They break down more often, especially in our hot summer heat. So over the last year, we've seen about a 24% increase in equipment maintenance. That goes with that increase of purchasing our trucks. And then, as I mentioned to Madam Chair earlier, health and regulatory and safety, that 132% represents one example of that ADEQ increase that we expect to see in the coming year. So what have we done? We've taken several actions to kind of weather this storm and stay afloat. One of the things we've done, and our biggest lever to pull in times where we have economic pressure, is to defer vehicle purchases. That's the only thing we can really do that doesn't impact actual service delivery in a way to save money quickly. This is not something we love to do because there is a compounding impact that we pay later for. For instance, back in the table where you saw where Brandy talked about revenue adjustments, back in 2018 when we had our last economic or unbalanced forecast, we had to defer vehicles. And in doing that, we aged our vehicles to the point where about 31% of our fleet was healthy or considered in good to excellent condition. Once we addressed that fiscal challenge and were structurally balanced, we were able to turn that around and see about a 66% health and excellent condition of our trucks. So that was a good path forward. As we start to get to the coming years and we're starting to pull back, we're starting to backslide a little. So this impact of deferring vehicles, by 2025, we're going to see about a 48% of our fleet being healthy or in excellent condition. And then by 26, if we don't address this, we'll be back to 2018 status of 66 or 31% being in a healthy status of our fleet. So you can see where, while it helps us in the short term, it hurts us in the long run to defer vehicles. Deferring capital projects is another thing we've done. That's something that we really focus on mission critical or environmental compliance in our capital improvement project, as Brandy mentioned. So some of the things we've deferred just in the short term is at our SR85 Cell 2 excavation and lining. We deferred that by $10 million to push that out in the out years a little bit, as well as our transfer station, $2.6 million in 25 and $4.5 million in 2026. And that's really pushing out some projects like asphalt, tip floor, structural stuff at the transfer stations just to keep the aging facility up and running. So while those things in the short term are helping us save money, in the long run they will need to be addressed. And the longer we wait, those are increased costs. We increased the commercial gate rate thanks to the support of mayor and council from $44 to $55 a ton, and that's really helped to ensure that our commercial customers are paying their fair share at the transfer station and not being subsidized by the residential rate. And then something we're pretty excited about is the renewable natural gas partnership. We joined the partnership, which allows us to purchase off the pipeline for renewable natural gas. And because of that, we're getting discounted rates on our CNG. We see that in the form of checks every month, like a credit or a revenue. Actually, over the 5 years that we have this agreement, we should be projecting to bring in $2 million in revenue by changing nothing other than joining this pipeline and investing in our CNG for our trucks. So very excited about that. And then we're continuing to pursue grants and other funding opportunities wherever possible that make sense for the utility. So next steps, we are working with finance, our solid waste rate advisory committee, and our consultant to work on strategies to address the structural imbalance that we are starting to see and that is going to be compounding in the coming years. We'll be looking to come back to subcommittee and council next fiscal year sometime to discuss strategies and options on how we can address the imbalance to get us back to a healthy state. And with that, we'll take any questions.
Thank you. And first off, I want to thank Councilwoman Hodge Washington for filling in for me. I had a dentist appointment I couldn't miss this morning, so I was a few minutes late. I do want to thank you for this presentation. I know that Councilwoman O'Brien thought it was a wise idea that we talk about this in the public so we understand what might be on the horizon, and I think it's a great idea. We did it for water, and we should also do it for public works. So with that, are there any questions? Councilwoman O'Brien?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. And I appreciate the detail about things you have done for the future and where our budget is. I just want to make sure that folks understand the fund balance you carry every year is $25 million. We don't keep adding on to that, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilman O'Brien, you're correct. The $25 million fund balance is a carryover. It does not compound. It is $25 million set aside every year to ensure that we stay within our good bond rating and structurally sound in that way as a rainy day fund. But we don't add to it every year and grow it.
So for the last 2 years, you have been deferring vehicle purchases as well as capital projects, or has that been longer?
Madam Chair, Councilman O'Brien, correct. We have, over the last 2 years, we've started to pull back on the purchases. So it's not that we've not purchased anything, but we're definitely scaling back on the number of trucks we'll purchase. And then we are just deferring projects that we can allow to do in the out years to save us that money on the front end. So that's not something that's regulatory or mission critical. For instance, right now the focus at the landfill is on developing our cell. So we have airspace to put garbage, and that's the big focus that we've deferred other things so that we can ensure that that project gets done and that we're sound in our landfill space.
Okay. I thank you very much for all of this information. I appreciate getting it, and thank you, Chairwoman, for allowing them to bring it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, Chair. I just wanted to ask a couple questions so you can expound a little bit on the net effect if these, going back to slide number 9, the major unfunded CI capital improvement projects. Tell us a little bit about what happens if we are unable to satisfy or to meet these obligations. I just want to make sure we understand the full net effect of that.
Madam Chair, Councilman Hodge Washington, thank you for that question. So, not to sound too draconian, but in the event that we are not able to do those unfunded projects, you're talking about not being able to bury garbage at the landfill, not having the space we need, not having a safe facility for our employees and the public to come and take their waste at the transfer stations, and basically shutting down the ability to handle the waste on the post-collection side. So I know the kind of the public-facing stuff is the trucks out there every day picking up the garbage, but there is a huge back-end part of this that ensures that we are doing this safely, that we are doing this responsibly, and that we have enough space for the next century for our Phoenicians to have sanitation.
One more follow-up question is, I think it's just worth clarifying that the projections as set forth in the solid waste financial plan that we saw on slide 7 and 8, they do include what we anticipate for the continued growth of Phoenix, but we still anticipate a deficit. I just want to make sure I'm correct on that.
Madam Chair, Councilman Hodge Washington, you're correct. We are accounting for potential growth and all of the things that we need in our forecast to ensure that we are planning for the appropriate space at our landfill.
And it includes even the anticipated increase in revenues that we anticipate to see, but it still shows a deficit and a shortfall, correct?
Correct.
Thank you so much. Those are my questions, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it. I believe now our interpreter has arrived, so yes. So could you introduce yourself, Cooper?
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you. This is Carmen Cota. I'll be providing interpretation services for our Spanish-speaking audience today. Give me a moment to introduce myself to them. Buenos días, soy Carmen Cota. Les voy a servir de intérprete esta mañana. Si ocupan que les interprete o escuchar el audio, alce la mano para proporcionarle los auriculares. Si va a dar comentario, por favor, de frases breves, deme la oportunidad de interpretar y luego siga con su comentario para brindarle la mejor interpretación posible. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Carmen. Our next item, item 6, is a discussion about network infrastructure services, fiber to home. Mario, if you can introduce our speakers.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee. We have Alan Stevenson, Deputy City Manager, here to kick off the presentation that includes Street Transportation Director Joe Brown as well, along with Kevin Sonoda from Street Transportation. So I'll kick it off to you, Alan.
Thank you, Mario. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. This item came before the subcommittee back in June of 23. Presented by then Streets Director Katie Knudsen. And since that time, we've had a few meetings with industry stakeholders. As you all know, we also got a new Streets Director and are back before you to present this information today just for some information to you guys, get some direction to continue to work with the stakeholders over the summer in hopes of bringing something to the council in September, October timeframe to come back to TIP and then the full council. So in this case, what is fiber to the home? It's a fiber optic communications network that transports internet data to and from the end user, as we all know it, that we get internet service through our homes. It's typically through fiber compared to internet that is via cell service if you're on your phone or something like that, that comes in a wireless manner. So it's very high speed and reliable. That's why people like fiber as a means to get internet service. And so in this case, there are some companies that provide just fiber to the home compared to existing ones like Cox, who provides fiber along with cable service in the city's right-of-way. But these are companies who just focus on fiber. You see the list of them there. And with Gigapower and Google Fiber, they are starting in the Southeast Valley, have agreements with some cities there. A couple of key issues that have come up in our discussions with Gigapower and Google Fiber and were referenced in a letter by Google Fiber that many of you received in the last couple of days is concerns about the slurry seal over local street requirements per the adopted city code, and then the installation of conduit, using micro trenching as the technique to do that. The important point to make really on the local street slurry requirements is, as many of you will recall, the city is doing an accelerated pavement program to cover our streets because of significant public concerns about the conditions of our streets over time. And so the city has advanced $200 million of T2050 transportation money to accelerate the pavement program and resurfacing of all of those. And that is a critical reason why that city code provision was adopted and why Streets has concerns about the longevity of any impacts and cuts into the street right-of-way, because it's not just these types of service providers, it's anyone who cuts into that, whether it's the city's water department to replace a water line, whether it's a city construction project for a fire station or any private development projects. The city code requirements that are there are about ensuring longevity of that pavement, because the fact that the city has advanced money that we'll be having to pay back in the future to ensure that we can provide high quality street surface for all of our residents. The construction and build out of this, the fiber to homes, are going to focus on residential properties. They're projected to take about 3 to 5 years to cover some of the targeted areas based upon some of our existing discussions with the stakeholders. They have a focus on North Central and Northeast, as well as the South Mountain Corridor. However, the city doesn't have any legal ability to influence locations of where they wish to put in the fiber. That's something that they get to choose from a business decision standpoint. Staff is requiring that they have to utilize a horizontal directional drill process to install them under the current city code as part of this proposal. So what this proposal would do is add a new section to the city code for fiber optic cable installation that would provide the internet service as discussed. Currently, Cox and Lumen CenturyLink are available to 98% of the county, estimated 99% coverage here in the city. Those operate under an existing license agreement for cable or telephone operators, and so that's where the fiber optic cable is also located. Network service providers, like the ones we're talking about here, are considered overbuilders, and so they offer consumers a choice. In this case, if they elect to move forward, residents will have a choice for internet service. Competition obviously is good in terms of improved service and lower cost. However, the city needs to balance that with the public impacts to our streets and the longevity of those, as it may impact future economic choices for the city because of those impacts. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe Brown, who's going to walk us through the rest of it here. And then, as Mario said, we do have Kevin Sonoda here, who's our utility coordination manager, in case there are any questions when we go forward. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. What you see here are some current prices. The monthly service fees are available online. The city does not regulate these or have any influence on them. The monthly costs may reflect prices for minimum term contract. So for a little background, historically residential internet service has been provided by the local phone companies Lumen and cable TV company Cox. In the past 2 years, there's been an influx in the number of companies that want to provide fiber to the home services only. With dial tone or cable TV services, no residential, to the residential customers. The emergence of fiber to the home only service providers is relatively new, and this subset industry does not have regulatory frameworks to define the rights and obligations that can be required by local governments. Cox Cable TV license fees currently are at 5% of cable TV revenues only, no license fees on telephone or internet. Waived permit and inspection fees amount to about $2.5 million, and over the last year, $7.5 million in fees remitted to the city from Cox. The license fees in other local cities are similar to the terms that were reached in the city of Mesa licenses for 5 service providers, 2% of gross revenues, payment of permit and inspection fees, payment of fees for contracted permit reviewers and inspectors if needed. So the initial proposals for fiber to the home that were made last September were 3% of gross revenues and $12 per residential unit passed as an annual minimum fee. Based on feedback from the industry in September and October of last year, Gigapower and Google Fiber both protested the 3% fee and the annual minimum fee. BAM, formerly Desert iNet, and Zoom asked for $9 per home passed. In October of 2023, we revised our proposal to 3% of gross revenues, $9 per residential unit passed as an annual minimum fee, and which was approved by both BAM and Zoom in the industry. The annual minimum fee was reduced this month at the request to relook at the financial impact on the companies and taking into account that a certain percentage of potential customers may not change to the new internet service provider due to a commitment to their existing wireline service provider, such as Cox or Lumen, or they are using a wireless internet service provider, such as AT&T, T-Mobile, or Verizon. The 6% fee you see on wholesale service was introduced just this month, also based on the goal to have parity in the fees remitted to fiber to the home providers that are the internet service provider and the open access companies that plan to wholesale, lease or rent the fiber to the home network to an internet service provider, with that provider being the service provider to the end user customer. With the wholesale rate projected to be about 50% of the retail rate, the 6% fee will result in similar fees being remitted by the retail fiber to the home provider. A $6 per residential unit passed, the projector customer take rate necessary for the annual minimum fee to be exceeded is about 22 to 25% of the homes passed. When this occurs, the annual minimum fee will be less than the 3 or 6% fee for the to be remitted to the city, and the annual minimum fee will no longer be applicable. So on June 14th, last week, we met with stakeholders. They had questions to clarify and explain the 6% license fee on the wholesale services, questions on the effective date of Chapter 5D and City Council, suggested wording adjustments for the definition of open access wholesale services, and Gigapower was on the record with concerns about the license fees and pavement restoration requirements per city code. In attendance at that meeting were Choice Network Services, Cox, Gigapower, Google, Metronet, Ubiquity, Verizon, and ZoomTech Arizona. This is a new city code chapter, not an amendment to an existing code chapter. Upon finalizing the structure of the license fees, City will post the license fees 60 days prior to City Council agenda that will consider adoption of Chapter 5D. Staff would present the final version of Chapter 5D to TIP, likely in September, and if going forward, then would be presented to City Council after that. For the actual licenses, 30 days has to pass from the City Council. Street staff would place network services licenses on City Council agendas in the future. That said, are there any questions for us?
Thank you. And I just have one brief question. So Gigapower put it on the record they had concerns about the license fees and the payment restoration. Part of what you saw was what was occurring in Mesa, right, with the way they were trenching. So, if I recall, Gigapower is also in Mesa? Yeah, so they provide to Mesa. So did you have a discussion about, with Gigapower about Mesa and your conversations with Mesa about the problems they faced?
We did have discussions, Chair and members of the council, but I could ask Kevin, who is our expert, to come up and answer that question specifically about whether they are actively in Mesa.
Madam Chair, I'm Kevin Sonoda, Special Projects Administrator in the Streets Department. And the installation in the city of Mesa started in October of 2022. And Since that point, we've had ongoing discussions with both Mesa and Chandler as they're having fiber to the home actively installed in those municipalities, and what the issues and concerns are with the installation process, the microtrenching installation process.
So your conversations with the other cities, it proved that it got more costly to do the procedure they were doing in those cities. Are they changing their processes?
Madam Chair, the cities in the Southeast Valley have approved microtrenching, and that was a condition for the licenses with Google, and I believe it's also a favorable position that Gigapower wanted the cities to be at, so that they had the ability to use microtrenching. So all of the cities in the East in the East Valley have adopted the ability for these companies to use microtrenching as an installation.
Okay. All right, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to follow up on the Vice Mayor, on the Chair's question regarding microtrenching. My concerns are, do the other East Valley cities have a similar restoration requirement in their code?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hodge Washington, the City of Phoenix's pavement restoration code is the gold standard for the state, and the other cities have other requirements for restoration, but they are not up to the levels that we require.
And the my understanding is the microtrenching, not only is it run, I want to make sure I get, it runs parallel with the street, but every 200 to 300 feet, you have to do what's the word? I want to say horizontal, but you have to cross the street, in other words. So microtrenching, my non-scientific term or not street term, is every 200 to 300 200 to 300 feet, we will have an indentation or a mark in our streets, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hodge Washington, you're correct. Every 200 to 300 feet, the fiber optic cable has to be trenched across to serve customers on the other side of the residential.
And do we have any data or any field research that tells us about the repair needs or the proper mode of repairing a microtrench? And I guess my concern is if we're going to allow that throughout the, I don't want to say hundreds of miles that we have in our city, what assurances do we have that this is not going to undermine the integrity of our streets, especially when you consider that we have invested a significant amount to ensure that we do have safe, aesthetically pleasing streets? If we're going to be doing something different, do we have any data to show that microtrenching is not going to undermine or reduce the life of these streets that we're investing in by repaving?
Chair and Councilwoman Hodge Washington, it's a good question. It is a concern. It's a concern around the country. It's very limited where microtrenching has been allowed because of those concerns. And if you take into account that there are competing firms that may be doing this, you could have 3, 4, or more of those transverse cuts across the roadway, say every 3 feet. So carving up the roadway into many different pieces, that now there's issues with water intrusion, there's bicycle safety issues in those grooves, there's pavement damage issues that would be greater than our current procedure.
And I did some Googling, so I won't call that research, but I know other cities, for example, like Las Vegas has Gigapower, and I know like Google Fiber is reported in different cities, larger cities like Miami, and I don't know, do we have any information as to, are other cities allowing this microtrenching without any level of assurances of indemnification for the damage, or do we know how they are being asked to restore the streets or to ensure the continued duration of the streets, durability of the streets?
Chair Stark and Councilwoman Hodge Washington, there is some information available. We did see the Las Vegas and did a records request. We don't have those records yet, so we don't know for sure if microtrenching was approved. We suspect it was. Around the country, there's been a big push for microtrenching in every state and every city. It's been allowed on a limited basis, so there's not a lot out there. We did do some research earlier in the year. I asked for that research to be done, and we didn't find peer cities, especially in the West, where they had a program of microtrenching. Only really here in the Valley we had better information.
And I know you guys showed us pictures of the microtrenching. Do you have those available so maybe the public can see what we're talking about?
Yep.
Is that too
Madam Chair,
difficult?
members of the, Kat, can you pull up the PowerPoint? And then after the questions, there's some slides, and Joe can advance to. Right there.
Yes, here it is.
So, Joe, you want to explain that? Just for the public?
It's actually easier when you see it, then you can understand the issues that might occur, especially for people on bicycles and
Yeah, Chair Stark and members of the council, I have experience with this in prior experience before coming to Phoenix, but I'm going to ask Kevin to talk us through the whole procedure.
Madam Chair, what is on the screen or in the PowerPoint in front of you, that there's two photographs. The one on the left shows the setup of a truck carrying a vacuum, a large vacuum on the trailer, and the blue hose is connected to the saw, which is on the right side of the picture or page. And that saw is a blade that is 2 inches wide that will cut a trench that's approximately 10 inches deep into the roadbed. And as it's cutting, the vacuum is actually sucking out the rock and the dirt that is in the roadbed. If you go to the next slide, this shows the cut, a little closer photo of the cut, and the photo on the right side of the page shows the crossing to go to the other side of the street so that they could install the fiber on both sides.
I have a question.
I just want to make sure that what we're seeing on the screen right now is what it looks during the process of microtrenching. It does not show how they have been restored or the anticipated method for restoration.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hodge Washington, that is correct. The restoration that is being used in the city of Mesa and other East Valley cities are what is called a mastic material, which is like a crack seal. So they're putting that in the top 1.5 to 2 inches of the trench, and that is what is being used to seal it.
And how does a mastic seal compare to what, let me go back to the correct language of the, I don't want to say the proper method of restoration, but how do they compare? What do we call them? How does that compare to the slurry seal asphalt treatment that is required under our code at section 3149?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hodge Washington, the slurry seal is actually a liquid sealant with some level of aggregate on it that actually provides a protection over the entire asphalt roadway. So when we take a look at the crack seal or the mastic, it is to fill in gaps or voids in the street before having slurry seal applied to it. There are instances where the mastic or the crack seal is used and it stays in a roadway for 6 to 12 months prior to a microsurfacing or slurry being applied to the street so that it could cure. And when the slurry seal is applied, then it bonds correctly to the asphalt and the crack seal.
And I would presume that the net effect is it's more of a durable and it's not as penetrable by water and other types of intrusion. And I'm talking about the slurry seal asphalt treatment versus the other version that they're doing currently in Mesa.
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hodge Washington, the slurry seal is a protective layer of sealant that's placed on the asphalt to improve the life of the asphalt. So it's protective, and it is to supplement any type of crack seal that is applied on the asphalt prior to that.
Thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Hodge Washington, if I could add a little bit to that. Because the city does not currently allow micro trenching, what industry would have to do is a traditional trench, which is laid deeper in the pavement, or bore across the right-of-way. And so that's what they would have to do, which is comparable to the micro trenching. And then the other comparison would be the mastic that Mesa is allowing versus our top seal requirement. One's sealant over the top, and the other's different ways to install the cable.
Thank you for that additional information.
Councilwoman O'Brien.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I'm going to back up a step because I would like to better understand why they have to cut every 200 to 300 feet across the road.
Madam Chair, Councilmember O'Brien, the reason for them cutting every 200 to 300 feet across is so that they can provide service on both sides of the road. And when we approached the companies that are proposing microtrenching, we had asked for them to go down one side of the street at an intersection, cross over, and then come down the entire length of the other side of the street. However, they said that that increases their overall length of fiber they have to install. Therefore, it wasn't cost effective for them to do it that way. So the preferred method is to do these cross cuts across the local street every 200 to 300 feet. Every 2 to 3 homes, they will provide that saw cut or the micro trench across the street so that they can provide service to the other side of the road.
So it increases their cost to, I'm sorry, did you say by how much? Did they tell you?
They didn't say how much it increased it. They were concerned more about the total length of fiber that needed to be installed, and they did not provide us with any calculations or case study information, but both companies had expressed concern about that requirement to them, for them to go down the entire length of the street, cross over at an intersection, and then come back down the other side to avoid the cuts across the street.
Okay, and so I just want to, sorry, very much a process girl. So if I'm one of these companies and I do this in one of our neighborhoods, and then a second company comes in 2 years later, they're going to use the same, and let's say we allow the micro trenching and the way they want to do it. Would they use the same micro trench to lay that new company's fiber?
Madam Chair, Councilmember O'Brien, great question. The second company would actually install their own microtrench. And in the city of Mesa, the standard there is for the second microtrench to be a minimum of 3 feet away from the original microtrench. But the companies would probably have to do the same number of cuts across the street in order to provide service to both sides of the road. So unless the second company followed the preferred methodology, which is go down one side of the street, cross over at the intersection, and come all the way down the other side, we would have 2 companies or more that are cutting across the street to serve customers on both sides.
Do we know in the East Valley, do they have multiple companies going into the same neighborhoods at different times?
There are a couple of locations in Mesa that have 2 companies in the street.
And they did it at separate times, not together.
Correct.
Okay.
So that would not be what we call a joint trench, where a utility company would go in and install conduit for themselves as well as for other providers.
And did you discuss joint trenching with the providers?
Madam Chair, Councilmember O'Brien, we've discussed it with them, and they don't have any interest in sharing.
Okay. You guys did a sample trenching in one of our yards. Tell me a little bit about that sample trenching.
In April 2021, we did a microtrenching trial with Crown Castle, which is a telecommunications company that was wanting to perform microtrenching of fiber in the streets. And so we had them do 4 sections of 125 feet each using different types of backfill. And so that's how they trenched it. They cut a trench that was about 10 inches deep, and for the 8 to 9 inches above that, they filled it with what we call half-sack slurry, so which is a mixture of dirt, gravel, and a little bit of cement. And that's our standard backfill for any type of construction project in the streets. So they use that backfill and different strengths of backfill, as well as 2 different styles of restoring the asphalt surface. One of them was using what was called an MTI backfill, which was an epoxy compound that they put in the top 1.5 inches of the asphalt, and they laid it right in that 2-inch cut. The other was a 24-inch wide mill and overlay. So they milled a 24-inch wide area across the asphalt, and they inlaid it with hot asphalt, and they rolled it with a roller.
And these were micro trenches, or these were a normal trench?
These were micro trenches.
These were the micro trench. Okay. And how are those doing today?
Madam Chair, Councilmember O'Brien, the micro trench analysis was done in January of 2022, and the city's materials lab made a recommendation that the 24-inch mill and inlay would, or what we call a T-top, would be the preferred method of restoration. And that was discussed with the companies that wanted to do microtrenching, and they were concerned about the cost, because there was an additional cost for them to come back and mill out 24 inches, then to come back and put asphalt and restore the street.
And did we do that in the near the gutters like we see in these pictures here, or did we do it in the center of a street?
Did it more in the travel lane, and this was done 3 years ago, so prior to the city of Mesa and other cities allowing microtrenching in their streets. So we were looking at the location in our street that we believe would be a logical place. One of the concerns about having it at the gutter or the asphalt and a concrete meet is that that's where stormwater travels. And so when you have a penetration into the roadway, and even if there's that mastic or the crack seal, that there's concern about penetration by water standing there along the curb or along the drain that would possibly penetrate into the roadbed and undermine the roadbed.
Okay. Thank you for all of that very technical information. I do greatly appreciate it. I want to go back, sorry, Chair, to the structure for payment and just understand that a little bit better to make sure I'm clear. The slide 9 says, okay, can you go, that's fine. Is Is this an either or how do they determine which one they're paying? The fee of 3% on direct gross revenues, or, I apologize, you're not on the $12. I went ahead. Yes, this is the right side. So for the residential, and you have the two top options, which one will they pay?
Chair Stark and Councilwoman O'Brien, it's one or the other, whichever is higher.
Okay. And I know from having talked to a couple of folks that they want to go into neighborhoods where there are already houses, and there's some, based on the infrastructure they need to have for this. But I'm going to tell you, as District 1, where I have the opportunity for a lot of new development, what I'd like to see added to this discussion is how do we get them to come to the table to add their fiber, whoever is interested in that, when we're building our new streets. Given the conditions of our streets, especially, and the fact that we've invested so much money over them, I have real concerns about the cutting and making sure our streets will last. So I am definitely invested in wanting us to have some kind of option that we can talk to and figure out how we can get them in ahead of time so that we're not going back and cutting up streets. Poor Joe knows and is tired of me complaining about my stretch of Pinnacle Peak between 35th Avenue and 55th Avenue because for the 3+ years I've been in office, I think it's been under construction more than it's not. And so I worry about, the drivability for our residents and then how long it lasts, especially given that we had just redone it. So can we put that on the list of things to discuss if you have not already? And if you have, I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman O'Brien, we will work with the industry on that over the summer to find out ways we can involve them more in that up front to try and do exactly what you're suggesting, and it's a great idea.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I want us to find a way to bring this to our residents because I think that choice is important. I've lived here my whole life, and I've been in neighborhoods where you only have one option for things, and so this is important. I would also love for them to talk more about joint trenching. I think that if we're going to go down this path, I'm additionally concerned about having a trench every 3 feet in the street. It's not fun for bike riders. It's not fun. We all know what happens when you have a cut in the asphalt and we get our monsoons. It tears up our roads. So I would like to have more discussion about that. Relative to the fee, do we think these are comparable to what our current vendors are paying in the city of Phoenix?
Chair Stark, Councilwoman O'Brien, yes, that was the goal. It's very similar to what Cox is paying right now.
And who's the other one we have?
Lumen.
Okay. All right. I think that's all my questions. Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up. I thank you for the information indicating that the joint micro-trenching was not something that's feasible, and now to actually learn that it would actually have to be 3 additional feet out from the, I guess, call it the last site of micro-trenching. But I think we've talked a lot about micro-trenching as the format in which some providers would like to provide their service, but I don't think that's the only other way. I see you nodding, Kevin. It's my understanding that other companies have proposed a horizontal bore process. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Hodge Washington, the horizontal boring is a process by which they have a drill that goes under the roadway and they pull conduit into that hole that's drilled. And so that's the current method for installing utilities in the right-of-way, whether it's electrical utilities or gas or also for telecom. And that is the installation process that the two companies that we have a temporary construction license with have agreed to use. So they're using the techniques and installation procedures that we currently allow in our streets. In addition to that, they will also examine using aerial fiber. So in the cases of neighborhoods that have existing aerial infrastructure, that they may go into those neighborhoods looking to install their cables on the poles to serve the residents.
And I think at this juncture, as a department, we agree that that process preserves the structural integrity of our streets, as well as it meets the restoration requirements that we have in our city code. Is that correct?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Hodge Washington, correct.
So just to kind of bring it all full circle, we have identified what we think is the proper methodology in which to provide fiber to the home. It's just that there are certain vendors that would like us to consider an additional methodology in which they can actually provide. And they're asking for some level of exemption from our requirements. And our concern is also, not if we exempt these individuals from the restoration requirements, one, not just the integrity of our streets, but we also have to be cognizant that other partners that the city aligns with, such as our home builders and developers, will of course ask for, as they rightfully should, ask for a similar exemption, and we would be faced with the city bearing the consequences or the financial responsibility of restoring the work done by other individuals. Does that kind of summarize the concerns?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Hodge Washington, that's correct as it relates to micro-trenching.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
And I do think it's important. We have invested a lot of money in our pavement management program. I know we had long discussions with the utility companies when they would come in and tear up the streets after we just paved them, and we came up with some solutions. They weren't very happy at first, but I think they realized the importance to our residents. So I hope as you go through this process over the summer that you make sure you meet with all the council and talk through the steps and the issues. But I appreciate your presentation. Obviously, we want everyone to have affordable access to the internet, but equally important is that we have good maintenance of our roads, because I know that's one of the number one complaints I get is just the road quality. And so anything we can do to ensure that we are complying with what we've already done, but we're making others do, I think is important.
I just wanted to ask one more clarifying question. So the structure for the other vendors, is the structure the same as what we're going to have, that we're proposing for these vendors? Or is it just that the net cost is approximately the same?
Madam Chair, Councilmember O'Brien, are you referring to the structure of the construction process, or?
No, the payment from Cox and CenturyLink for having their cables in our streets, the cost structure that they pay versus what we're proposing here.
Madam Chair, Councilmember O'Brien, so under their current license, Cox Communications pays 5% of cable TV revenues only. And the services that they provide in addition to cable TV, which is telephone and internet service, those are not subject to any type of license fees. And that's a federal rule on that. When we look at Lumen at this point is exempt from any type of fees because of their standing as a telecommunications provider. And that would be the same for other companies that are granted a certificate of convenience and necessity from the Corporation Commission as a telecommunications corporation, that they would also be exempt based on state statute.
Okay, so that we can't, it's not like comparing apples to apples. Okay, he's shaking his head no, so. Thank you. Appreciate that.
And Madam Chair, Councilman O'Brien, if I could add, staff does anticipate that when Cox's agreement expires, which is in the next couple of years here, that whatever gets agreed to as part of this would then become what we start with Cox on for those discussions as well, because their license agreement will be up at that time to renegotiate things. So provisions that are in here would likely then be working on trying to apply to them in a fashion. And then we will make sure that we do visit with all the council members over the summer here and in the early fall before we come back with a revised proposal regarding this item.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your presentation. It's a pretty important topic. Thank you. Next, we have call to the public. If the city attorney could explain public comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. During citizen comment, members of the public may address the subcommittee for up to 3 minutes on issues of interest or concern to them. The Arizona Open Meeting Law permits the subcommittee members to listen to the comments, but prohibits members from discussing or acting on the matters presented.
Thank you. Our first speaker is Jessica Dobbs.
Everyone. So, in March of 2020, under the cover of the lockdown, a gate was unlocked at South Mountain to allow dump trucks to come in and dump about 150 loads of unfiltered debris. That's huge rocks down to tiny little dirt, totally unfiltered. When you go out there, you can see it is completely randomly placed for the most part, except for where they've been removing it around. So that was all quickly noticed by locals, particularly people that were using the park through COVID to ride their bikes and stuff. And that led to an article being written by Ray Stern in the Phoenix New Times the following year in February, so just under a year later. And I would like to read the subheading for that. It says, a large delivery of rock and debris to South Mountain Park and Preserve by a home builder, that's Mary Kay, last year was authorized without a paper trail. So that means they dumped all that rock in there in a preserve, and we don't have a good paper trail on who authorized that. In that article, also, the head at that point of the, let's see, that was Alonzo, so the head of the Natural Resource Division, he stated that the Office of Environmental Programs conducted testing, and it determined that it wouldn't be harmful to the park. He said, quote, the test determined the materials can go into the park, but not into washes or the river bottom, so they will be staying away from washes. There's a few issues with that statement. Those tests were done in April of 2020, a month after it was already dumped in the park. That testing took place at the original job site, not on the rock and stuff that was already dumped in the park. And that testing also took place after torrential downpours of rain, if everybody remembers at the beginning of COVID. So the material had kind of gotten washed down, moved around, and wasn't even the actual material that was now in the park. Also, that department of that office, OEP, was lied to by Parks because they did not know that it had already been dumped in South Mountain. So this is all looking very sloppy or criminal. So the city and the citizens in the city and our preserve deserve way better than this. We would invite you guys to come on out. You can come view the site. It's extremely obvious when you go out there. I mean, literally, it's like completely obvious. I have a handout for you guys too.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Tim Sierakowski.
Good afternoon, Tim Sierakowski. Oh, it's good morning. I'm trying to figure out who authorized the dumping. Because at the time, a ranger would not have opened up gates without being told to open up gates. We have done record requests asking for this information. To date, we have not received any. So I'm trying to figure out who told these individuals to dump over there. I'd also like to see all the communication between Mary Kay and the Parks Department. Who at the Parks Department talked to all these individuals? Because in order to dump that amount, they would have to have someone at the Parks Department authorize the dumping. So we would like to know exactly what's going on here with the dumping. The dirt wasn't screened. At a job site, as such, Mary Kay would have had to have been screening this dirt to be removed. They didn't screen it. They just dumped what they had, so they didn't have to screen it. The EPA that was at Mary Kay's site for housing at the present time, they're having problems finding the soil samples that Mary Kay had to present to them before they could consequently do any of the digging and removing of the soil. So at the present time, that's questionable. I think it's advantageous for people who are really concerned about, quote, the people in their districts and in Arizona and Phoenix to start to look into this, because illegal dumping in parks, if it happens once, it could happen again. And it seems like no one's really concerned about dumping that amount of soil that seemed to be a little polluted being dumped in river and bed streams, which is a federal violation. I don't know if you're aware of this, though, of the amount of money it could cost the city at this point for the dumping. Because if the EPA now becomes involved in this, it will assess the dumping of each one of the dump trucks from the date it dumped, and that would go back 4 years. So we'd like someone at the present time to look into this and start representing the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker, Eric Nelson.
Hi, I'm Eric. I came to public comment today to talk about the planning part of planning transportation and infrastructure. And there's only one plan that I think is really, really important to the city, and that's how is the city going to react to the federal government trying to put a consent decree on us. I'd like to start my comments by pointing out that a while ago a police officer got shot at 10th Street Southern, and I happened to live not too far down the street, so I walked over there to show my support and kind of see what was going on. And I noticed that the other person who shows up at the shooting on a Sunday morning is Councilwoman Ann O'Brien. So I think she should be in charge of the negotiations, because I think she has both the city's and the police department's best interests. Because one thing I noticed from being around politicians and stuff like that is that when they really care about something, you can tell if you follow along. I think the police department in the city of Phoenix does a really good job. And I would add that if a police department isn't treating individuals differently because they're minors, I would say that's actually probably good that your police department's doling out equality, because even a 16-year-old can shoot you. I think if the city, I think the city should take its chance with the justices, because anything else will look like weakness to our officers, and judges are usually pretty reasonable people. And also, if we take our chances with the justices, that gives us time to get ahead of it and implement changes ourselves, to put us in a better position to show the judge, here's what we did, here's the changes we're making. I had one more thought on this. it's slipping my mind right now, and I'm running out of time. But I think I've delivered the message I came to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is future agenda items. I do believe that we take a 2-month break, and sometimes the mayor changes the composition of the subcommittees, but if there's anything we can at least put in the hopper, if you have any.
Add to the agenda infrastructure for areas of development.
Yes.
For the hopefully the September meeting.
Yes, that would be infrastructure more in the state land areas, and yes, and trying to coordinate with them. That's a good topic. Thank you. Put that on future agenda items. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
It seats anywhere between 80 to 100 people and is reservable. This is our beautiful courtyard.